that down and put Cars Land over there.
Well, that's a smart idea. There's a possibility of doing that. Then they're floating the idea around. In other words, that's what they're doing. They're just not doing speculation. They're just throwing the idea out there to see what the public wants. Is that right, Mindy?
That might be part of it. I mean, Disney doesn't do anything without taking surveys and taking the pulse of the public. They don't just jump into anything.
Right.
They want to make sure that there's demand for whatever they do.
Right.
Just like there was a lot of demand for the family suite category, and so they did a test. What they did was, before they did that, they took a small section of the All-Star Music Resort, and they renovated the rooms to be suites.
Oh, really?
And the demand was extremely high.
Huh.
People, I mean, they booked up right away, and people were calling and saying, "I want family suites on one." So they said, they said, this is going to sell very well. So then, what they ended up doing is the Pop Century Resort was built right before the recession. I want to say it was built at the end of the 90s. And it was supposed to be built in 2 phases, in 2 sections. And the 2 sections were going to be separated by a lake with a bridge across it. And it was called the Generation Gap Bridge. And the section that they opened first had the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. And there's a building theme to all those decades. And, they've got it themed to the hill. When you walk by the 70s building, you hear disco music coming out of the bushes. When you walk in the 50s area, you hear music from those eras coming out of the bushes. And so it's themed not just, to what you see, but what you hear, what you know. But anyways, so they built that section, and they were going to build the other section was going to be, I think, it must have been the 1900s, the 1910s, the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s. And that section was going to come up next. But then the recession hit, and demand for hotel rooms dropped.
Right.
And they weren't filling the hotel rooms that they had, so they weren't going to build any more. So they just kind of left it. And they left half constructed buildings. They just sat there. Some of them had were partially painted. Some of them were just framed. I mean, they left them just sitting there. And people would walk over to the Generation Gap Bridge, and they would, get out their binoculars and look over there and say, "What's going on?" But, they just left it.
Right.
And when they decided to do the family suites thing, instead of the legendary years, which is what I think they were going to call that section.
Well, that's cool.
Instead of completing that section, they just made it a whole completely different resort.
Oh, wow.